Phil Kessel, Dion Phaneuf, and Tyler Seguin are just a few of the names that highlight Brian Burke's reign with the Toronto Maple Leafs.
We require as a team proper levels of pugnacity, testosterone, truculence, and belligerence. That's how our teams play.
Burkie's 4-year tenure is easily defined by a failure to make the playoffs, but during his time as president and GM, Burke repeatedly preached on the theme of hard-nosed hockey while his roster makeup failed to mirror such words.
I'm trying to build a championship team here, and that's very hard to see today. But the building blocks, the keys you need, the Phil Kessels, the Joffrey Lupos, the Jake Gardners, the Dion Phaneufs, the second line, all those things have been put in place. And that's what can't be overlooked.
In late 2008, Burke inherited a Maple Leafs roster that had failed to make the playoffs in 3 consecutive seasons. In his first year, Burke made a collection of small ball moves, acquiring several second-round picks which would later be traded or wasted on dud talent. But at the 2009 NHL Draft, he did select Nazem Kadri 7th overall, which was a considerable win for the Leafs. However, come the 2009-2010 season, it became very clear that the Leafs would not embrace a traditional rebuild. In September, Burke traded 2 first-round picks along with a second-rounder to the Boston Bruins, acquiring Phil Kessel in exchange, and just 2 months later, Burke made waves with another big move, acquiring Dion Phaneuf from the Calgary Flames. Say what you will about Phil, and I'm a Pittsburgh Penguins fan, but the Kessel trade was incredibly short-sighted. Touching on the Phaneuf trade, the Leafs definitely won this deal, as Dion also fit in well with Brian Burke's brand of hockey. But in the years following these deals, Toronto repeatedly finished in the bottom third of the league, painting a confusing picture of what exactly Burke was trying to accomplish. The underlying theme shared in both of these trades came in a failure to project the developing capabilities of both players. Phaneuf and Kessel were never able to fill the roles which Burke carved out for them because they simply weren't those players.
We better get you on the bike there, buddy, if you're going to keep eating these cookies. That's your 4th one today.
My first one. Okay.
Phil, I saw you had 3 other ones in there before the media thing.
Kessel's ultimate success only came once he was placed in a supporting role in Pittsburgh, while Phaneuf's best years came prior to Toronto, playing alongside the likes of Robin Regeer, Adrian Aucoin, and Mark Giordano. But wrapping up the Leafs' 2010 season, which granted Boston the 2nd overall pick in the NHL Draft, Burke continued to mold his team. Without a first-round pick, the Leafs swung and missed on virtually all of their draft selections. Toronto signed Colby Armstrong to a 3-year, $9 million contract, which did not work out. Clark MacArthur was signed to a 1-year deal, and this one really did work out. Burke traded Victor Stahlberg for Chris Versteeg, and Nikolai Kulemin was re-signed to a 2-year extension. So the 2010-2011 season comes and the Leafs continue to struggle, prompting a February trade which brought Joffrey Lupul and Jake Gardner to the Leafs. Regardless of Lupul's struggles to stay healthy, I'd argue that this was one of Burkie's best transactions with the Leafs. Later in that same month, Burkie traded Thomas Caberlet to Boston for Joe Colborne, as well as a 1st and 2nd round pick, though one of those selections would later be traded again so Toronto could select Tyler Biggs. Wrapping up that season, the Leafs missed the playoffs and subsequently failed to make up any ground at the 2011 NHL Draft. Heading into free agency, Toronto signed some decent contract extensions while also acquiring John Michael Lyles in exchange for a 2nd round pick in an attempt to boost their defensive presence. Come free agency, the Leafs also acquired Matthew Lombardi and Cody Franzen in a deal that Toronto easily won. Burkie subsequently signed Tyler Bozak and Clark MacArthur to 2-year extensions, and just prior to the 2011-2012 season, the Leafs also signed Luke Schenn to a 5-year, $18 million contract. That season, the Leafs saw significant offensive contributions from Phil Kessel, Joffrey Lupul, and Mikhail Grabovski. On defense, there was improvements, but James Reimer took a considerable step back as goaltending became a vocal point of the team's struggles. Consequently, the Leafs once again missed the postseason, even after Ron Wilson was replaced by Randy Carlyle. That year, Burke and his management team handed out 2 massive contract extensions to Mikhail Grabovski and John Michael Liles, and both of those were significant errors. Grabovski was bought out only 1 year later, while Liles' contract was later traded for Tim Gleason's. Turning to the 2012 draft, where the Leafs selected Morgan Rielly with their 5th overall pick before taking Connor Brown in the 6th round. But at the draft, the Leafs also made a notable trade, sending Luke Schenn to Philadelphia for James Van Riemsdyk. This was a substantial move for the Leafs, as Van Riemsdyk found considerable chemistry with Phil Kessel, while Luke Schenn struggled to live up to his hype. That trade would mark Burkie's final big move, as the Leafs' new ownership group would relieve him of his duties just prior to the 2013 season. What came next for the Leafs was still very much a product of Burkie's work, but just like that, it was over.
You can be proud of that. I came in this organization and I lead with integrity and honesty and truculence, whatever the fuck that word is. I just like using it a lot because looked it up in the fucking thesaurus there.
Brian Burke came to Toronto with a chip on his shoulder after leaving the Anaheim Ducks on his terms just 1 year removed from winning a Stanley Cup. He described his position with the Leafs as his dream job. He obviously had the intention of turning the team around quickly via trades, but in doing that, he took some massive risks that simply didn't pan out. In my opinion, Burkie's tenure lacked patience. When it came to filling the most important roles on his roster, he made his decisions quickly, and though the Leafs scouting department surely deserves equal, if not greater blame, drafting was a disaster during the Burke era. Maybe Burke was signed with an unrealistic goal from Leafs ownership, and maybe he's guilty of misassessing the team's potential, but regardless of both of these factors, Burke's tenure with the team was largely a failure.
Brian, why didn't it work here, do you think?
We didn't win enough games.
Is there...
Well, I think people stand up here when they get let go and they say, well, you have to look at the mess I inherited, which is not fair to John Ferguson. The players John left me, we managed to turn into some pretty good players, so it's not fair to him. And I don't expect Dave Nonis to stand up here in 5 years or whenever he gets the axe and say, well, look what I started with. That's another excuse. I mean, I knew what the roster was when I came here. There was no secrets about it. So I'm not ducking that one either. You know, I'm not going to say, well, look at what I had when I got here. That's not fair to Fergie. So you guys can evaluate all that stuff. You don't need my view on that.
For What's Happening in Hockey, I'm Tate Lakecraft.